Today on Diabetes Connections Type 2. When you get a diabetes diagnosis, eating well is usually at the top of the to-do list. But then you get home and you look around the kitchen and, let's face it, most of us aren't sure where to start. What's easy to cook that will taste good and be good for you? This week, I'm talking to Chef Robert Lewis, who calls himself the Happy Diabetic. He lives with type 2. He started off very unhappy, and he will explain what changed. Also this week, we're explaining the term postprandial blood sugar. What does that mean? And why is your doctor so concerned about it? This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Diabetes Connections Type 2. I am your host, Stacey Sims, and I've been podcasting about diabetes since 2015 with a focus mostly on type 1 and people who need to inject or infuse insulin. But we launched this new show just a few weeks ago, specifically for people with type 2, whether you're using insulin or not. I'm really glad you found us. One quick housekeeping note before we jump in. A couple of episodes ago, I talked about a paid study. This is for adults in the U.S. with type 2. And I want to mention it again because they are still looking for people. I will link this up in the show notes. You can also follow the Diabetes Connections page on Facebook. It is there as well. The Behavioral Diabetes Institute is looking to see how different types of glucose monitoring devices affect your thoughts and feelings about diabetes, something that is really not studied very much, and also how they affect glucose levels over a 3-month period. You're either going to get, at no cost to you, a fingerstick blood glucose device or a new CGM, testing supplies, the whole schmear. So to find out more, see if you qualify, there is a link in the show notes once again. If you can't find those wherever you're listening, whatever podcast app you're on, head on over to diabetes-connections.com. Click on the Type 2 show. It will be in the episode homepage for this episode. And the one I'm talking about that I referred back to was our episode with Dr. Bill Polonsky, and he talks about it at much more length in that episode. But I hope you check that out. I hope to bring more study opportunities to you, especially paid study opportunities. Those are always nice. And one of the reasons I wanted to start this show is because my husband lives with type 2, my son lives with type 1, and so many times these terms are thrown around. There's a lot of jargon in diabetes. And I'm trying to clear that up, so we start every show with just a little bit of diabetes knowledge. So let's jump into that. Since we are talking about food this episode, I wanted to define one of the most common terms you will hear around it, postprandial. It just means after a meal. This is a little embarrassing, but for a long time, I thought the word prandial was Latin, and I thought I was pretty smart for knowing exactly what it meant. But in fact, prandial is English. And I just didn't realize that. All right, so why is it important for diabetes, no matter the language? It's a really good measure of how diabetes is managed. As you digest food, blood glucose levels go up, and the pancreas releases insulin to move that glucose, or sugar, from the blood into the cells of muscle and other tissues to be used for fuel. Without diabetes, within 2 hours of eating, your insulin and blood glucose levels should return to normal. What does that really mean? Well, in most people without diabetes, your postprandial numbers an hour or two after a meal rarely go higher than 140. And they return to preprandial or before meal levels within 2 to 3 hours. But absorption of your carbs actually continues in everybody for 5 to 6 hours after a meal. There's a lot that happens here too. Your postprandial glucose numbers are affected by how active you are, insulin sensitivity, how quickly food moves through your stomach. The American Diabetes Association recommends that people with type 2 diabetes keep their postprandial glucose numbers under 180. It's worth noting that continuous glucose monitoring has really changed the game here. It's better to get a comprehensive look at what your glucose is doing throughout the entire day. But if you're limited to finger sticks, in the early days, a lot of people, let's face it, your insurance may not cover a CGM. Postprandial only is a good way to get at least an idea of what's going on. And I will also say, and we'll talk about this a lot, I'm sure, in episodes to come, I'm a huge fan of CGM. As I said, my son has type 1, my husband has type 2. We've got a lot of CGM devices in my house. But especially in the beginning, it can be really difficult to not be obsessed with those numbers, right? I mean, how many times are you looking at it? When you get it, most people, the first week they get a CGM, they look at it 1 billion times a day. So it is worth a discussion with your doctor about when they really want you to think about those numbers. Is postprandial the goal? Is fasting in the morning? Is there a goal for that? Rather than trying to stay 100% time in range, which is really tough stuff. But that's for another day. I'm linking up all this postprandial information in the show notes. These sources are the University of Rochester and an article I found that was helpful, I think, from Everyday Health. Okay, my guest this week is an author, a podcast host himself, a speaker, and an all-around great guy. Chef Robert Lewis graduated from the prestigious Culinary Institute of America, had a very successful career, hotels, restaurants, owned his own restaurants, and then he was diagnosed with type 2. I will let him tell more of the story, but let's just say at first, he was devastated. He thought his days of good eating, as he says, were over. He'll explain how he realized that wasn't true. He has great basic advice for those of us who aren't so great in the kitchen. Chef Robert, the happy diabetic, after this. US Med sets the bar high when it comes to diabetes care. US Med excels in customer satisfaction, ranking #1 in Dexcom customer surveys. And online, they're #1 in Google and Facebook customer ratings among large national diabetes DMEs. With over 1 million satisfied diabetes customers since 1996, they've perfected the art of delivering better service and better care. From insulin pumps to diabetes testing supplies and the latest CGMs like Freestyle Libre 2 and the Dexcom G6, they've got you covered. Plus, they accept Medicare nationwide and collaborate with over 800 private insurers. US Med, your trusted partner in diabetes care. Your health, satisfaction, and peace of mind are their priority. Visit usmed.com/Stacey. That's usmed.com/STACEY. Chef, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. Thanks for spending some time with me and my listeners.
Stacey, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You got it. I know you have a lot of great advice and a lot of easy things to do. But before we jump in, would you mind just talking about your diagnosis? You've lived with type 2 for a pretty long time now.
It has been a long time. I was diagnosed in 1998 in a moment of my life where I knew nothing about diabetes. And so my diabetic journey began at the doctor's office, where after my A1C of about 450, or actually my blood sugar was 450, my A1C was 11. The doctor said, "Hey, congratulations, you have type 2 diabetes." And I said, "What is that?" So he left the room, came back with a bundle of brochures and pamphlets and said, "Here you go, take these home, read this. This will tell you everything you need to know about diabetes. And if you have any questions, reach out to me." And so I remember leaving the doctor's office thinking to myself, looking through some of the pamphlets and talking about food choices and foods you can't eat or smell or get near. And I thought, well, this is not going to be a disease for me. And so I would tell people I have a very mild case of diabetes. I'm a borderline diabetic, all this kind of stuff. I basically was in denial for about 6 months. Wasn't taking my medicine, wasn't checking my blood sugars. I mean, let's just be honest, Stacey. A guillotine poking device to draw blood out of my finger was not going to happen. But after about 6 months of not doing well, not feeling great, my wife insisted, booked for me an all-expense paid trip to my local hospital for a 2-day, everything you've wanted to know about diabetes class. And so off I go, saying, I know I need to make some changes, but there I was surrounded by 30, 40 people with diabetes trying to live a better, happy diabetic life. I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel strange about it. And that was sort of my diabetic spiritual awakening. And then from there, I just started figuring that food was a component of diabetes, and maybe I can learn how to eat better, cook healthy, and start developing recipes. Long story short, someone said, "Wow, these are really great. Where can I buy your cookbook?" And that sort of started the journey for the happy diabetic. Wrote a couple cookbooks, and here I am today. Diabetes under control, but challenged every day, just like many of the people listening, and trying to live my best happy diabetic life.
I love it. I'd love to ask you, though, those first 6 months when my husband was diagnosed with type 2, when my friends are, the first thing that, that most people kind of panic about truly is what to eat. And you're so interesting because food was already such an important part of your life. You graduated from the Culinary Institute of America. I mean, you, in my opinion, what you were doing with food. Was your first reaction around it kind of like, I can never eat again? I can never eat anything good again?
Well, it kind of was because the advice from my doctor was certainly that message. But the dietitians I met with and worked with helped me to understand that everything can be a part of a healthy diabetic lifestyle with maybe the exception of cotton candy. But in the first 6 months of my diagnosis, I did what most responsible people would do, look at wacky websites about nutrition on the internet, and I learned that carbohydrates was maybe not a great thing for diabetics. Cut it out, lower it, whatever. And I realized that a lot of carbohydrates in breakfast cereal, which I love. So I stopped eating breakfast cereal, and I thought that would cure my diabetes, right? So again, I went out and looked for some really great advice with dietitians, certified diabetic educators who helped me understand my body, what I like to eat, and help to guide and direct me, which my message is to anyone listening who has type 2, type 1, any kind of diabetes, pre-diabetic, find yourself a certified registered dietitian who can help you take the mystery out of the food component, because your doctor's only had about a week and a half of nutrition training in med school.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be your best resource for nutrition. But for me, I just started to learn foods that I loved and foods that made sense to help me control my blood glucose levels. And I went out looking for cookbooks written by diabetics, whatever, and I couldn't really find any back in the day. So I really wanted to do some chef-inspired cooking, but make it delicious and diabetic friendly, opposed to casseroles and baked dishes. I tried to make chef-inspired dishes that tasted great, looked great, and that celebrated less fat, less oil, less salt, less sugar, but lots of flavor.
Yeah. Do you remember one of the first dishes where you thought, aha, I can do this. This is going to work for me?
Yeah, actually what it was a Mediterranean style stir-fry dish.
Yum.
That incorporated lots of vegetables, some white beans, some garlic, lots of spices, kind of Mediterranean. And this was back in 2000 when maybe Mediterranean was emerging, but that was a delicious meal that fit all the categories: low salt, low oil, low carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, and less sugar, but lots of flavor in a food that I love to eat. So that's kind of what did it for me. And from then it was just open the floodgates. I need to create more recipes that were simple. Another thing about that recipe was, when I wrote out the ingredients, it was only about an inch thick. So I thought, okay, anyone can make this. And every item came from the local grocery store. So that was kind of my impetus to move forward to create dishes that were easy to make and delicious.
Yeah. And that's such a big deal because in our house, my husband is the much better cook. He enjoys it. It's actually a stress relief for him. He loves it. I get stressed out when I have to cook. I feel like I'm not good at it. If the recipe's too long, I get intimidated. I have a lot of go-tos. So when you talk about simple cooking, I'm like, oh, thank goodness. I don't need a dinner that's going to take me 3 days to make. And I assume that that's a lot of the feedback you've gotten in the more than 20 years that you've been doing this.
It is. I think what makes it so appealing is that you can get everything locally. The recipes aren't complicated, but they taste chef-inspired and delicious. Yeah. I mean, I get freaked out when I have to look at a recipe with 20 ingredients and think, oh my gosh, I need to make a special trip for a teaspoon of this. And I always look at what can I do to simplify it, because we're busy.
Yeah.
Everyone's busy. The option is go through a fast food drive-through. I'm saying let's cook fast food in your house. Yeah. Simple and easy and delicious with foods that you have.
Well, and let's talk about that. Any quick tips for, I know you have so many resources and we're going to link to all of them and I appreciate that so much. But, 1 or 2 quick tips for okay, it's now, I'm listening to this podcast at 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to make for dinner tonight.
Yeah, sure. I do a lot of prep work. Mm-hmm. So I'm prepared for those days where I'm thinking, I don't feel like cooking. So right now, if you came to my house close to the banks of the Mississippi River, you would find 5 or 6 packages of cooked chicken breasts sliced up in baggies. So if I'm making a chicken dish or something, the chicken's cooked, I pull it out of the freezer, thaw it out, and away I go. I've always got 2 or 3 soups in the freezer that I make in the Instant Pot. And I tend to have ingredients in my pantry that I know I'm going to use often, like lots of beans and legumes, brown rice, some pastas, bottled tomato sauces, things of that nature, so that I've got an arsenal ready to go, especially seasonings. Oregano, basil, rosemary, Italian seasoning, garlic, onion powder, those things that I really like, soy sauce, olive oil, avocado oil. And I just keep those things as my arsenal, as staples that I have. So I can take any protein, salmon, and create a really great dish. I always have quinoa hanging around. So yeah, those are some of the things I use just to kind of think about it.
Question for convenience. For nutrition, I think sometimes people feel like vegetables that have been frozen or canned are like cheating. You shouldn't use them. You can only use fresh. That's something that's really easy to reach for, right?
Stacy, thank you for asking that question. It's an amazing question, and it's a question I get all the time. So frozen vegetables and fresh vegetables have the same nutritional value. And what I love about frozen vegetables, they come in smaller containers, they're less expensive, and they are on demand, ready to go, and delicious. For example, the frozen food growers in California pick the broccoli, pick the Brussels sprouts, the peppers, whatever. It goes straight into a processing plant where they're washed, cleaned, cut, and frozen. I live in Iowa. The broccoli gets made in Paso Robles, California, or somewhere in the central area of California, put on a truck, put on a train, shipped to Iowa, in a warehouse, then to my supermarket. The longer that happens, the less nutrients stay within the product. So trust me, Stacy, I'm a big fan of frozen vegetables. I think they get a bad rap. I think people think, oh, they're not fresh, but they are delicious and very handy. I use them all the time. Always have broccoli in the freezer. Always have peas in the freezer. Always.
I'm not the best cook. And sometimes when I take frozen vegetables to use in a stir fry or something else, they get kind of mushy. Any tips for cooking them better?
They can get mushy because they're already cooked. They're already been blanched and partially cooked, just like every vegetable in a can has been cooked in the can. So my tip would be cook the chicken, make the sauce, use the onions, and whatever frozen vegetables, they should go in last, just till they're heated and you're ready to go.
I'm laughing because I wrote a cookbook for charity many years ago called I Can't Cook, but I Know Someone Who Can. And it was with restaurant recipes from Charlotte, North Carolina. And so it's like, look, I can't cook. I know these guys. And we made a good recipe book. But I do, I cooked for my kids when they were growing up. But that frozen, those mush, there's nothing worse, right? Than instead of like a crisp piece of broccoli, you get this like mush. So thank you. I will definitely try that.
In today's world, many of the frozen vegetables can be microwaved in the pouch, and it creates its own steam and cooked beautifully.
Where do you stand on adding stuff to vegetables to make them taste better? I mean, some people are afraid to put any cheese or any other flavorings or any other stuff on it. Like, it's like, I must do my penance and eat my peas all by themselves.
I love flavor. So I'm all about seasonings and ways to kick up the flavor of the foods that you're eating. Cheese, you're adding a lot of fat to that, but here again, a little goes a long way. Maybe use a feta cheese or a hard Parmesan cheese opposed to like melty cheddar cheese that has a lot of fat. But I'm all about seasonings and kicking the flavor of vegetables up or roasting them to kind of get them crunchy and caramelized to make them taste really great. Squeeze a little lime juice or lemon juice over it, top it with a little feta cheese. Amazing.
That's great. So this time of year, I think people are inundated with eat this way, do this one thing to beat diabetes, never be heavy again if you try this one trick. I've got to imagine that drives you bananas. Can you talk a little bit about what should people be thinking this time of year? There are ways to do this that aren't fad diets. It can be pretty tricky to travel with insulin, especially if you're going somewhere very cold or somewhere very hot. We have found something that really works well for us, and that is the VIVI Cap from Temperamed. It keeps your insulin at the exact right temperature even in the extreme heat or cold. And it works for any insulin pen. Super simple. You just take the cap off your insulin pen and you slide the VIVI Cap on. No batteries, no charging, no water or ice packs. It lasts for years and gives you 24/7, 365 protection because insulin is very temperature sensitive. VIVI Cap has a 30-day, 100% money-back guarantee, and it's got a 2-year warranty. Find out more. I've got a link in the show notes for you, or you can go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Tempramed VIVI Cap logo.
So here's my take. I suggest, I don't like the word diet. I mean, what are the first 3 letters of diet? So I don't like that word. I think diet is something that's difficult and not sustainable. What I suggest for people to do is develop a lifestyle way of eating. I mean, celebrate a half-pound loss in 2 weeks. Take baby steps, right? You can't eat an elephant all at one time. So I don't propose that in January you start dieting, heavy exercise. I'm saying create a lifestyle way of exercise and eating that makes sense throughout the entire year and develop strong habits and make that part of your lifestyle. I mean, that's what I've done, and that's what works really great for me. I can't sustain a diet. I can lose 10 pounds. I can't sustain it. But if I can drop a pound every 3 weeks, oh my gosh, it's a beautiful thing. I can sustain that. And then in 6 months, 8 months, you've lost 10 pounds or whatever. It's a beautiful thing.
So do you mind me asking how you're doing with diabetes? Do you use technology? You mentioned the harpoon, which was a huge, I probably can grab a picture of it, was the Lancer that you used to check your blood sugar years ago was not the tiny little Lancer that people are able to use now.
No, it was like a guillotine. So I love technology. I tell people all the time, if you're going to get diabetes, this is the best time to ever get it in the world. I mean, we have great technology. We have great medications. We have great endocrinologists and so much advancement. So for me, I take some medication. I take metformin and Jardiance. I also take a mealtime insulin. So I only take insulin when I'm eating. And that will really depend on what I'm eating, right? I do not check my blood sugars with a conventional meter. I use a continuous glucose monitor. I use the Libre 2 and the Libre 3 sensors. I've used the Libre sensors for about 5 years, and it's changed my life. It's changed my doctor's life because she can easily track how I'm doing. Plus, I can't lie about it anymore because it's all in the app. And there it is. She can see what I'm doing. But it's helped me manage my diabetes. And I get my CGM through U.S. Medical Supply, and I get a 90-day supply. So it's so easy to get and to use. And if you're on Medicare, Medicare approves those devices. Yeah. It's, your doctor can help you. And I would only suggest this. If your diabetic doctor is suggesting you don't need a CGM, it's not right for you, I would get a second opinion or a third. I would find yourself a doctor who can do it, because really, I've not pricked my finger except maybe if I'm on vacation and I'm in a place where my sensor wears out, but that's few and far between.
Yeah, CGM really has changed the game.
So yeah, I love technology. It's really great. And, my wife loves it because it has alarms, and the alarms go off in the middle of the night if I have a low blood sugar or if I have a high blood sugar. And then I can make adjustments on the fly, and I can swipe. And so I can really see what my blood glucose is doing after I eat or after I exercise.
It's great stuff. It's such a good guide.
Knowledge is power.
No doubt. No doubt. Just for fun, I don't want to say cheat food. This is why I'm stumbling all over the place, because I want to ask you, what do you eat when you're just like, okay, I have diabetes, but I'm going to enjoy this anyway. And I was about to call it a cheat food. I don't want to start that kind of terminology around here. So let me just ask you, diabetes aside, what's something that you love and you treat yourself to?
Macaroni and cheese. I mean, I don't even have to think twice about that. I just love that. But here again, everything in moderation has worked really great for me. I really monitor my portion sizes. I don't starve myself all day long. I eat little snacky snacks throughout the day. I have a very well-balanced meal, maybe 3 to 4 ounces of a protein, a fish, a chicken, something, 2 handfuls of vegetables, and a computer mouse size of rice or potato. But beyond that, I'll have a Hershey bar with almonds, but not every day and not every hour. And I'll treat myself to those things Because listen, who wants to never eat a Hershey bar ever again? Or a baked potato ever again?
Yeah.
Or I was doing some consulting and the person I was working with said, hey, my doctor said I should not eat raspberries ever again. And I said, well, why not? Well, he says there's too much sugar in that. So there's a perfect example of the knowledge not knowing. I mean, raspberries are one of the lowest sugar items. This person loved raspberries. Eat some raspberries, but you're not going to eat 5 pints of raspberries, 5 pints of strawberries, 24 apples, 13 oranges.
I hope
everything in moderation.
This has been so helpful. Before I let you go, as I said, you have lots of resources. We'll point people in that direction.
I mean, unless your doctor has told you you have diverticulitis and you can't eat a fruit with seeds, that's different.
Yeah.
You know, that trumps everything. But if you are a type 2 diabetic wanting to eat healthy, I mean, I think a diet of 60% vegetables, you know, those kinds of things, 40% proteins works for me.
That's great.
Lots of fruit and vegetables, lean proteins.
As we're leaving here, I'm guessing there are a lot of people listening who say, this was great advice. I still don't know how to cook. I'm intimidated in the kitchen. Do you have a place to start? I mean, I tell my friends, just make breakfast a couple times a week.
I think you're exactly right. Breakfast is a simple and easy food that you can make. But I would suggest start small. Don't find yourself the biggest, baddest recipe on the internet that probably wasn't tested with 20 ingredients. Start with something small. I mean, whatever. Go to my website, happydiabetic.com. Check out my recipes. You can certainly email me. You can certainly use the contact link. I'd happy to hook up with you and help you to get started on that. But I say just do it. Just start. Start somewhere. Start with a small recipe that looks inviting. And even if you make it and you're like going, that wasn't bad, what I would do is say to that person, now, what would you do to make it more your style?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they are Hispanic. Maybe they are Asian. So maybe you're going to substitute this for salsa and turn this into something really delicious.
Yeah. We could do a whole show on not giving up your traditional flavors, what your family loves, your ethnicity, all of that for type 2, because I see that a lot. With every ethnicity, people say, oh, I can't cook like this. I can't eat Italian. I can't eat Asian, like you said. And that's just not the case. I love that you said that.
Yeah. And for me, my secret to my success has been handling my portions. I love apple pie, but I'm not eating one this big anymore. You know, it's going to be a smaller slice. It's going to be a manageable portion. And I think for me, that's made a huge difference. Wonderful.
Well, I really appreciate you spending some time with me and my listeners. You've got, like I said, great resources, your own podcast you've been doing for years. Thanks for, jumping on here on this new show and spreading the love and sharing some info. Thanks, Chef.
You know, Stacey, it was my honor to be here and I'm feeling so much love. Happy to hang out anytime with you.
More about Chef Roberts in the show notes, including his podcast. I will link that up. It is called The Happy Diabetic Kitchen. And you can find that show pretty much wherever you found this one, wherever you get, podcasts or audio. It's a great show, and he's been doing it for a very long time. It's funny. I wrote a book for charity. It was for JDRF many years ago called I Can't Cook, but I Know Someone Who Can. And we took restaurant recipes. I asked restaurants in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live, to donate their recipes. And I wrote funny stories about how I can't cook and disaster stories of feeding, frozen chicken to my family, that kind of thing. And I think about that all the time when I talk to real chefs. Thankfully, my husband is a great cook. He actually owned restaurants in his career as well. So, I married well, so I eat well. But my favorite tip when I am left to my own devices is one that Chef Robert mentioned, which is keeping the protein around, making chicken in advance and then keeping it in the freezer. I don't know if this is something that is well known, but I recently made a bunch of chicken breasts in the crock pot just to cook them. And then I don't like to shred. I find like it's hard to shred with forks and stuff. I put them in the blender. It worked so well. You have to be careful, like 3 seconds in the blender. I have one of these crazy blenders, for smoothies and soups and stuff. So it worked really well, but be careful any longer than that and you will get chicken goop. So be careful. Anyway, that is the show. If you like it, please share it. We are in early days here. And the best way to spread the word about a show like this is word of mouth. So please tell a friend, post about it on social media. Let your doctor know. We found with the Type 1 show that lots of endocrinologists like to share it, and I would love to know what you think. You can always email me, Stacy@diabetes-connections.com. Thanks as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions, and thank you so much for listening. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacy Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
It can be pretty tricky to travel with insulin, especially if you're going somewhere very cold or somewhere very hot. We have found something that really works well for us, and that is the VIVI Cap from Tempramed. It keeps your insulin at the exact right temperature, even in the extreme heat or cold, and it works for any insulin pen. Super simple. You just take the cap off your insulin pen and you slide the VIVI Cap on. No batteries, no charging, no water or ice packs. It lasts for years and gives you 24/7, 365 protection because insulin is very temperature sensitive. VIVI Cap has a 30-day, 100% money-back guarantee, and it's got a 2-year warranty. Find out more. I've got a link in the show notes for you, or you can go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Tempramed VIVI Cap logo.